The Ghosts of the Silent Star. Chapter 1. The Abandoned Bay. It was a dark, foggy night as Clara Martins reached the desolate bay. Heavy clouds pressed down on the sky, and the dim moonlight struggled to break through the dense fog. The air was damp and cold, making her feel as if the place had been frozen in time, cut off from the world around it. Ahead of Clara lay the wreck of the Silent Star, once a luxurious cruise ship that had mysteriously run aground in this bay 50 years ago. Since then, no one had dared to set foot on the ship. At least, no one who came back to tell the tale. The nearby coastal town was filled with whispers about the ship. Most people avoided it, believing it was cursed. There were tales of strange lights, eerie sounds, and the missing. Young men and women had disappeared near the ship, and the locals believed their souls were trapped aboard. Clara didn't believe in such things. As a private detective, she had encountered many cases involving the supernatural, but all had rational explanations. Yet, the recent reports of disappearances intrigued her, and despite the ominous warnings, she had come to investigate. She approached the old wooden boat that would carry her to the Silent Star. It creaked under her weight as she rowed toward the towering wreck. As she neared the ship, the fog thickened, and the vast silhouette of the ship loomed like a giant beast in the water. The decaying hull and towering decks of the once grand vessel were now silent, shrouded in darkness. When Clara reached the side of the ship, she tied her boat to a rusty ladder. With a deep breath, she began to climb. The metal groaned with each step, but eventually she reached the deck. There, the eerie silence was overwhelming. The deck was littered with broken furniture and abandoned luggage, remnants of a time when the Silent Star had been a luxurious escape. Clara took out her flashlight, scanning the ship's surface. Her heart pounded in her chest as she walked toward the entrance of the ship's interior. The oppressive quiet only made her more aware of how isolated she was on this enormous haunted vessel. She stepped into the dark hallway, which led to the old ballroom where many reported ghostly sights had occurred. When she pushed open the door to the ballroom, it groaned, and a wave of cold air washed over her. The large, opulent room was now a decaying relic. Dust hung thick in the air, cobwebs adorned the walls, and the once bright chandeliers were crooked and covered in filth. Old suitcases were scattered around, as if the passengers had fled in a hurry. Suddenly, Clara heard something, a faint whisper. She froze, her breath caught in her throat. The whisper was soft, but unmistakable, as though the walls themselves were murmuring. She whipped her flashlight around, but saw nothing. "Hello?" she called out, but the only answer was the continued, distant whispering. It seemed to come from every direction, making it impossible to pinpoint its source. Clara's pulse quickened, but she shook off the unease, knowing she had to press on. Chapter 2. The First Encounter. As Clara ventured deeper into the ship, the atmosphere grew heavier. The further she walked, the more it felt as though the ship were watching her, waiting for something. The eerie sensation of being observed was unnerving. The hallway she was in led to the passenger cabins. Long ago, these corridors had echoed with the laughter and chatter of travelers, but now only silence and decay remained. Doors to the cabins were ajar, windows shattered, and the air was thick with the scent of mildew and rotting wood. Clara's flashlight flickered as she approached one of the doors. She peered inside and found an old luxury cabin. It was in ruins, furniture overturned, an old dress hanging limply over a chair. But something caught her eye in the corner of the room. A mirror. Her flashlight beam passed over it, and for a split second, Clara saw something. A face. It was ghostly pale, with hollow eyes staring back at her from the reflection. Startled, she turned around. but no one was there. Her breathing grew ragged, but she forced herself to stay calm. It had been so brief, perhaps a trick of the light. Still, the image of that hollow-eyed face lingered in her mind. Clara pressed on, making her way to the lower levels of the ship. She knew that the answers she sought would likely be in the engine room, where strange activity had been reported. The engine room was vast and decayed, filled with rusting machinery. The cold air here was almost unbearable, and it seemed to Clara as though the ship itself was breathing, a low mechanical hum vibrating through the walls. At the center of the room, she saw something unusual, a massive structure pulsing with energy. It looked like a heart covered in seaweed and grime, but still beating as though it were the ship's very soul. Clara's heart raced. Could this strange object be what was holding the ghosts here? As she examined the heart, she began to hear the whispers again. They grew louder, and this time she saw figures emerging from the shadows. Ghostly passengers appeared, their faces pale and hollow, their clothes tattered. One of them stepped forward, a woman in a torn evening gown. "We are trapped here," the woman whispered. "The ship won't let us go." Clara's mind raced. These were the souls of the passengers who had never escaped. She knew what she had to do. The heart of the silent star was the key. It was keeping them here, feeding off their pain and trapping them in this endless nightmare. "How can I free you?" Clara asked, her voice trembling. "Destroy the heart," the ghostly woman replied. "Only then will we be free, and the ship can finally rest." Chapter 3. The Final Act. Determined, Clara grabbed a heavy metal tool lying nearby. She approached the pulsing heart, knowing this was her only chance. With all her strength, she swung the tool and struck the heart. It shuddered but didn't break. The whispers grew louder, more desperate, as if the ship itself was fighting back. Clara struck again, and this time, the heart cracked. A loud, unearthly scream echoed through the engine room, the sound of the ship itself in agony. The walls began to tremble, and the floor beneath Clara's feet started to shift. She struck the heart one last time, and it shattered. The pulsing stopped, and the room fell eerily silent. Suddenly, the ship began to collapse. Clara could hear the sound of metal groaning as the ship started to sink. The ghosts around her began to fade, their hollow faces finally at peace. The ship, having lost its cursed energy, was dying. Clara ran as fast as she could, racing through the corridors as water began to flood in. The silent star was sinking rapidly, and she had only moments to escape. She reached the deck just as the ship tilted, the cold waters of the bay rushing over the sides. With a final leap, she threw herself over the railing and plunged into the icy water. Gasping for breath, she surfaced and swam to her small boat. As she pulled herself aboard, she looked back. The silent star was vanishing beneath the waves, finally sinking into the depths where it belonged, its dark secrets buried with it. Clara, shivering and exhausted, sat in her boat as the fog closed in once more. The ghosts were free, and the ship was no more. She had solved the mystery, but at a cost she would never forget.